Hey guys, we're continuing the development of our current Winforms application. And we're now at the stage where we want to actually start collecting the information from the form upon submit. Now, I'm going to use this about a minute to explain a very important concept that can save you a lot of time in your development activity. And this is renaming your controls. So when we're designing this form, we went to the toolbox, we dragged over the controls, and we placed them where we wanted. We changed a few properties. One property we did not change was the name. So if we click on the text box, we would see that it has a name property, and every control that you're going to click on has a name property, and the name here is text box 1. Now, by default, it's going to always be counting. So if this is the first text box, it's going to be text box 1. The second text box is going to be text box 2. The third, fourth, etc., etc. That is not ideal when you have a few text boxes, because you want to know which text box exactly has the customer name. So by leaving them as the default name, text box 1, text box 2, etc., every time you're going to want to know the information, you're going to have to come back over, click on the text box, look at the name and say, oh yeah, that's the one I want. So I'm going to give you a little technique that is best practice, actually, that will help you to reduce the amount of investigation and you know, time you spend trying to find the control you want. And that is simply to change the name. So I have a simple convention where I use a prefix to determine or to depict rather the type of control that is being referenced, and then I give it a name that is akin to the information that it's supposed to have. So let's do the text box. So I have the text box here that is collecting customer name. So my ideal name for this is not text box 1, but it would be something like TB, which is short for text box, or you could say TXT, whatever it is, but some prefix that says this is a text box, right? So I'm saying TB customer name. All right. Now this is me naming the object. So remember I said that each control is an object. So by saying TB customer name and not text box 1, this object is now called TB customer name. The same rules that apply to naming a variable apply here. No spaces, no special characters outside of the underscore. And the simpler the better. All right. So no need to have any long complicated name with 50 characters. Somebody asked me one time if there was a character limit. I said there is none, but I'm not entirely sure why, what he had in mind for a name. But, you know, the simpler, the better. So TB customer name is telling me that this is a text box, suppose that should be holding the customer name. And I'm going to repeat that for every other control, because then I want to be able to reference them easily from code. But let's just start with the TB customer name. And then I want that when the person clicks submit, I'm going to print the contents of the customer name text box in another window. So I'm going to acknowledge that, okay, car has been rented to that person. All right. So that means my click needs to work. My submit button needs to do something when it is clicked. So I was talking about being very deliberate when creating your events, and I'm going to show you exactly what I meant. So we click our button, we go to properties, and then you notice that in our properties pane, we have this like paper with a wrench on top. It may look, you know, shoddy on my display, but it may look better on yours. But that paper with that wrench, that's the properties window or the properties section of the pane. And then we have this lightning bolt. And if we hover, we see events. So when we hover over our lightning bolts, we see the menu switch, and then we have a bunch of options for events. And once again, an event is like a reaction to an action, right? So a click is an action. What do you want to do when I am clicked? That is basically what an event is. So I have the button and I want to determine that something should happen when said button is clicked. So for that, I need a method stub. So I can click, just make sure I have click, and then double click in this editable looking area. And when I do that, it generates that method stub, just like it did with the label when we double clicked it in our previous video. All right. But once again, I was very deliberate. I knew exactly what I was doing. So Long story short, the shortest way to make a click event for a button for sure is to just double click it and it will generate that event. No problem. But I want you to be very deliberate when you're doing that. So you know exactly what you're doing and you're not making any mistakes along the way or reducing the mistakes you make along the way. So we wanted the click event. So now it brings us over to the code file or the code behind. And then let's just take a look at what this click event looks like. It's a private void, and then it has the name of the button 1 underscore click, right? So that's another reason you want to rename your controls, because if I had 6 buttons, I wouldn't want button 1 underscore click, button 2 underscore click. Instead, if I called this button submit, and then I generated the click event, sorry. So if I had renamed it in the properties, which I didn't, and I won't, since we're already this far ahead, I'm just explaining the concept to you. Had I changed the name to submit or something like BTN submit, right? And then generated the event, then I would have gotten BTN submit underscore click. So whatever the name of the control is, underscore the type of event, that's the naming convention that will always be used when generating these method stubs. All right. And then it is taking two parameters, object sender and event args e. I'm not going to get into what those mean, at least not yet. As you go along, you'll see their purpose. But right now, what I want to do is display some form of message to say, thank you for submitting your information. So I have a simple message box in C#, so I can say message box dot, and it has a method called show. So if you're familiar with the console.writeLine, it's very similar. Console.writeLine writes to the console. Message box dot show shows a message box with a message in it, and a message has to be a string, right? So what is the message you want to display? You just say thank you for renting. All right, so let's just leave it as that. Thank you for renting for now, and let's just see how these methods work, or this click event. So when I click start, all right, and then I fill out my form. So I'm just putting random data, select the type of car, it's rented on the 1st and it's coming back the Monday, and then I click submit. Then you will see the message box, thank you for renting. All right, so that's what happened when I clicked. Then it called the function. So that's the event, because the function is there, but notice it didn't fire until the click happened. All right, so that's the core feature of events-driven programming. So now I can inject the text coming from the text box. So I'm going to use interpolation and do a little concatenation here. So I put the $sign before the string, and then inside the string, I'm just going to inject. I want the text from the text box. What's the name of the text box? Remember that we renamed the text box to be TB customer name. So when I want to make reference to that control, I just need to make reference to the name of the control, tb.customer_name. Now tb.customer_name, if I hover over it, you'll see that it is a text box. It's a class type, right? But then remember that these are objects of type whatever control they are. So this is an object of type text box, and it has all of these properties. The property that gives me the data that was entered into the text box would be text. All right, so there is a text property. We didn't fill it out because, well, you don't want text to be inside of your text box at the start. But then once the user, have entered text into the text box, then you want the text from it. So we need to say we want TB customer name, that's our text box control, dot the property text. So this will give us the text that was entered into the text box during runtime. So let's try that again. So I'm going to click start, and then I'm going to say Abigail Walters, and Abigail Walters. Spelling. Sorry. All right. Abigail Walters, and then I click submit, and then there we go. So we have the message box showing thank you. Thank you renting. Thank you for renting. All right. So I can just modify all of that anyway. So thank you for renting. Such poor English. I apologize. And then I can just say : and the customer name that was entered into the text box. All right. So that is it. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on this line just so we can see exactly what's happening. So when I click line, well, for me, line 20, it might be a different line for you, but I click the name of the method or the line that the method definition starts on. I'm clicking in this little gray pane between the leftmost pane and the line, the code line numbers, and then that little red dot will appear. So that's a debug or a breakpoint rather. And then I click start. So what happens is that this breakpoint is going to get hit under certain circumstances. So for as long as the program is running, the breakpoint isn't being hit. We're doing all of these things. The breakpoint isn't being hit until we hit submit. And then we see that, okay, that is where it really calls a function. It pauses in execution. So once you see that yellow arrow, it's pointing to the line that it's now at. And if we, sit down and take some time to assess what's going on here, when we're in debug mode, we can actually see what's inside our variables. So if we hover over sender, you'll see that sender is telling us that it was some submit, right? Some submit or some control with the text submit sent the call to this event, right? And if you look in the E, you'll see some other stuff. Once again, I'm not going to get too much into what all of those mean, but the fact is that Visual Studio allows us to pause our code in execution, go line by line and see something. So when you're running into program, like logic errors or something like that, and you just want to see exactly where your mistake was, you can use these breakpoints to kind of pause and step through. I won't go through the step through just yet, but I'm just going to remove the breakpoint. So just by clicking back where the red circle was, that turns it on and off. And then I can just click continue, and then it will continue with the execution. And then it says, thank you for renting. And whatever random text was entered into the customer name. So following that principle, I want you to stop this video right now and then go ahead and rename the other controls and then try and produce a message box that prints out the contents of each of these controls. And so you would have something like order, new rental, customer name is this, the date rented is that, the date returned is that, and the type of car rented is that. And that's what I expect to see in your message box. All right, so I hope you at least pause the video and attempt it, but I'm going to walk you through the changes that I just made. So I continued and I renamed my controls. So I changed my date picker, datetime picker to DT rented. So the date rented, I changed to DT rented. The one for date returned, I say DT returned. So if you didn't do it and you want to follow along, just, you can follow along. Just pause as you need to go along. For the combo box, I changed it to CB type of car. So once again, I have the prefix for the type of the control and then the name. So CB for combo box, DT for date time, TB for text box. I mean, it's up to you. I'm not telling you to use those prefixes exactly. You can choose your own. Just a humble suggestion that will help you along the way. All right. And then I modified my submit button. So let's look at some of the code I wrote in the submit, and you'll see some very different code. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what's happening here. So I like that I'm able to generate a variable and then store the value from the control inside the variable. Now, the advantage for that, or for me, is that when I have it in a variable, I can do anything I want. So it's easier to manipulate when I put it in a variable than to be writing. If I needed to write the text 5 more times after it has been entered into the text box, I don't want to be saying tb.text, tb customer name.text every time. So if I put it in a nice convenient variable, I can use this variable along the way and do any other computation I want. So my humble suggestion to you is that for each control that you're going to be taking data from, you have a corresponding variable to accept it, and then you can manipulate the data through the variable as you wish. All right. So I have string username collecting the text for the username text box. I have string date out, and then look at what I'm doing here now. So the date time picker is going to be bringing back a value of type date time. But I intend to print a string to screen, so I can't put a date time on into the string just as easily. So I have to do a little type conversion where I just say to string. So I'm getting back the value, which would have been whatever is set inside of the text box or the date time picker. That's the date. And then I'm just saying, give me the date as a string. Now there's much more we can do, but I'm going to keep it simple right now. And I do the same for date in, string, date in, and then I say dt returned that value, and then I say to string. So I'm converting these two date values into strings so that I can print them. Now in the fourth line, I have a different variable type that we have never looked at, or at least I haven't looked at with you, and that is called var. Now this is not really a data type. This is not a data type at all. Var is like, it is just like an agnostic declaration that we can use on a variable, and then this variable will be relative to whatever is being assigned to it. So let me just make some space between them. So notice for every other one, I said this is supposed to be a string. So we know it's a string. As we look at it, we know that these are strings. When I say var, I am saying var because I am not sure what kind of value would be put into it. So I can declare a variable as var. And then if I assigned the number 1 to this, then car type becomes an integer. See there? So I said var, but then I said car type is equal to 1. It is now an integer. So it knows that 1 is an integer. So the variable or the variable type is now an integer. If I said 1.1, which you know is either a double or a float, and I hover, no, it's a double. So if I assigned a string, then car type is now a string. All right. So the point is that var is a very I actually love using var so much that it took me a while to remember that I can write the word string. So var is very convenient, very flexible. You can use it if you wish. It will cut down the time of trying to figure out what data type your variable or your object needs to be. You can just say var, give it a name, equals, and whatever you assign to it, it just knows that that is the data type it's working with at that moment. All right. So that's very convenient. So I just use this opportunity to introduce that to you. So I said var car type is equal to the combo box, which I call CB type of car dot selected item, because I want that when you select the one from the drop list, that's the one I'm interested in getting back. And then I have to do a toString because selected item is a type of object. So then I have to say convert that to string, and then it gives me back the string value of whatever was selected. And then with all of that done, I can now say message box. So this is the ultimate objective, message box show. And what I'm going to be showing is, and I'll just use my interpolation and write my nice paragraph. So I'm going to say something like customer name, colon, and then instead of having to write TB customer name.text, I can just say customer name, because I stored the value from the text box inside of this variable. All right. And then I can do a line break here. So what I want is each value in its own line. So to do that in C# in a string, I'd have to do something like \n\r. So this is the break. This is how I get that break, right? So it's almost like customer name, enter, then the next bit of information, enter. So each time you see this, it's like an enter key press. All right. So customer name in one line, then I break line, then I can press enter and it will automatically just adjust the string to allow me to continue typing. So I'm doing this because I don't want to type too much to the right and off the screen. So I have customer name, and then I'm injecting the variable, and then I have date rented, colon, and then I'm going to inject the variable date out. All right. Then I'm going to break again. So to make this fast, I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it every time. Break, go to the next line, and then date returned, colon, and then this would be date in. All right. And then see, I didn't write it properly. So case matters very much. Break line again. And then the car type All right. And then we inject the variable, which is car type. All right. And then, so the expectation now is that when we fill out our form and then we click submit, we're supposed to see all this information. And let me just add one more line, which just says, thank you for your business. All right. So let's try that. So I press start. All right. So I have customer name, test renter, date rented is Saturday, February 1, date to be returned is the 4th, and the type of car is the Lada. And then I click submit, and then there we go. We have customer name, the text from the text box. We have the date rented and the date and time, The car type is Lada, and then the thank you note. All right. So that is how we go about getting information from our form and, well, manipulating it thereafter. So this manipulation is really just to present it. The manipulation could be to, do a computation on the values that are there. It could be that we submit it to the database, whatever it is. The fact is now we know how to get the information. So later on, we'll look at how we add things like validation and other features like sending it to the database.